April 4th, 1922. A group of neighbors approaches an isolated farmhouse in rural Bavaria, Germany. No one has seen the family in 4 days. The mail is piling up. The children haven't been to school. The animals are crying out from hunger. As they step onto the property, they notice something strange. The farm is running. Smoke rises from the chimney. Someone has been feeding the cattle, but when they call out, no one answers. They find the barn first. Inside, stacked like firewood, are 4 bodies: a man, a woman, a young woman, and a 7-year-old girl. Their skulls have been caved in with a pickaxe. Inside the house, they find 2 more, a toddler in his crib, and the maid, dead in her bedroom. She'd only arrived that morning. Here's what makes this case one of the most terrifying unsolved murders in history. After killing 6 people, the murderer didn't leave. He stayed for days, eating their food, sleeping in their beds, feeding their animals, and then he vanished without a trace. To understand what happened at Hinterkaifeck, you need to understand the family who lived there. And this family had secrets, dark secrets that the entire village whispered about, but no one dared speak of openly. The patriarch was Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, a successful farmer, yes, but also a man known for his violent temper and his cruelty. His wife Kazilia was 72, a quiet woman who had learned long ago to keep her head down and her mouth shut. Their daughter Victoria was 35 and widowed. Her husband had died in World War I, leaving her trapped back at the family farm with 2 young children, a 7-year-old daughter, also named Cecilia, and a 2-year-old son named Joseph. But here's where it gets disturbing. The villagers whispered that Victoria's children might not be the product of her marriage at all. They whispered that Andreas Gruber had been abusing his own daughter for years, that her son Joseph, the 2-year-old, was actually the product of incest. This wasn't just gossip. In 1915, Andreas was actually convicted of incest with Victoria and spent a year in prison. When he returned, nothing changed. The abuse continued. The family kept their silence, and the village pretended not to see. This gives us our first potential motive. Andreas Gruber had made enemies. He'd brought shame to his family and his community. Someone may have wanted revenge, or justice, or simply to end the horror happening inside that farmhouse. Now here's a crucial detail that investigators would later focus on. 6 months before the murders, the Gruber's maid quit. Her name has been lost to history, but her reason for leaving hasn't. She told neighbors that the farm was haunted. She heard footsteps in the attic at night. She found strange things moved around the house. She felt like she was being watched. The Grubers dismissed her as superstitious and foolish, but what if she wasn't? What if someone really was hiding in that attic, watching the family, learning their routines, waiting? In late March 1922, the Grubers finally found a replacement maid. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. She was 44 years old. She arrived at Hinterkaifeck on March 31st for her first day of work. She would be dead within hours. In the days before the murders, Andreas Gruber told several people in the village about something strange he'd discovered. Fresh footprints in the snow, leading from the forest to the farm. But here's the thing, there were no footprints leading back. Someone had walked to the farm and never left. Andreas searched the property, but found nothing. No intruder, no sign of forced entry, nothing out of place. But the footprints were real. He showed them to neighbors. They confirmed it. Someone had come to Hinterkaifeck and was still there, hiding somewhere on the property. Andreas Gruber knew someone was watching him, and he did nothing. He didn't call the police. He didn't flee. He stayed. Maybe he thought he could handle it himself. Maybe his pride wouldn't let him admit fear. Whatever the reason, he chose to stay in a house with an intruder, and that choice would cost him everything. The footprints weren't the only warning sign. Andreas found a newspaper on the property that no one in the family had purchased. He found that someone had been tampering with the barn door lock. Keys went missing, then reappeared in strange places. And most disturbing of all, the family heard sounds from the attic, just like the maid had reported before she quit. Footsteps above their heads at night, creaking boards, the sound of someone moving in a space that should have been empty. The family discussed it among themselves. They chalked it up to animals or settling wood or overactive imaginations. But deep down, they must have known. Someone was in that house with them, watching, waiting. For what, they didn't know. But on the night of March 31st, they would find out. March 31st, 1922, the last day. It began like any other at Hinterkaifeck. Andreas worked the fields despite the unsettling events of recent days. Kazilia prepared meals. Victoria cared for the children, and around midday, Maria Baumgartner arrived to begin her new position as maid. Imagine being Maria in that moment, walking up to an isolated farmhouse for a job you desperately need, unaware that the family you're about to meet has mere hours to live, unaware that somewhere in this house or barn or forest, someone is watching you arrive, adding you to his list. Did the family seem nervous to her? Did she notice anything strange? We'll never know. Maria Baumgartner was shown to her small bedroom, unpacked her belongings, and began her duties. Evening fell, dinner was prepared, and somewhere, in the darkness, the killer made his move. The exact sequence of events that night can only be reconstructed from the physical evidence found days later, but investigators believe it happened something like this. At some point in the evening, after dinner, someone or something lured the family members to the barn one by one. First Andreas. Perhaps he heard a noise outside. Perhaps he went to check on the animals. He walked into that barn and never walked out. Then Cecilia, his wife. Maybe she went looking for her husband when he didn't return. Maybe the killer called to her using Andreas's voice. Then Victoria, also drawn out by concern or deception. And finally, little Cecilia, 7 years old, wondering where her mother and grandparents had gone, walking into the darkness to find them. She found them all right. She saw their bodies, and then the mattock came down on her too. One by one, they walked into the darkness. One by one, they died. The killer was efficient and brutal. A single blow to the head with a mattock, a heavy farm tool like a pickaxe, was enough to kill or incapacitate. When investigators found the bodies days later, the 4 victims in the barn had been stacked, carefully arranged, covered with hay as if to hide them. The 7-year-old Cecilia showed signs of a different fate. Unlike the others, she hadn't died instantly. She'd been alive for hours after the attack. Evidence showed she'd torn out clumps of her own hair as she lay dying in agony. A child, mortally wounded, lying in the dark beside her dead family, slowly dying alone. Of all the horrors of Hinterkaifeck, this might be the worst. With 4 family members dead in the barn, the killer turned to the house. Inside, 2 people remained. Maria Baumgartner, the new maid, likely had no idea what had happened outside. She was probably in her small bedroom, perhaps already asleep after her first exhausting day of work. And in his crib was 2-year-old Joseph. The killer entered the house. He found Maria first. Unlike the barn victims, she appears to have put up a fight. Defensive wounds on her arms suggest she tried to protect herself. It didn't matter. The mattock did its work. Then he found Joseph, 2 years old, asleep in his crib. The killer murdered him there, in his bed. And then something even more disturbing happened. Instead of fleeing into the night, the killer stayed. This is where Hinterkaifeck becomes unlike any other crime. Most killers flee. They murder and they run, putting as much distance between themselves and the crime as possible. Not this one. After killing 6 people, this murderer made himself at home. For the next 4 days, someone lived at Hinterkaifeck among the corpses. They fed the cattle and pigs, keeping the animals alive. They milked the cows. They lit fires in the hearth to keep warm. They ate food from the kitchen. Evidence suggests they even slept in the beds. Neighbors passing by in the distance saw smoke from the chimney and assumed everything was normal. The farm was running. Someone was there. But that someone was not the Gruber family. It was their killer, playing house among his victims. For 4 days, life continued around Hinterkaifeck, while death filled it. The children didn't show up for school. Teachers noted their absence but assumed illness. The mail carrier left letters that piled up at the door. Neighbors noticed they hadn't seen the Grubers at church on Sunday, unusual for a devoutly Catholic family, but didn't think much of it. Everyone was busy with their own lives, and the farm kept running, which meant someone was there, which meant everything must be fine. It wasn't until April 4th that the silence became impossible to ignore. The postman mentioned to someone that mail was piling up. A neighbor mentioned the children had missed days of school. A mechanic who had an appointment at the farm arrived to find no one answered his knocking. Concern grew into worry. Worry grew into a search party. A small group set out for Hinterkaifeck that afternoon. As they approached, the first thing they noticed was the eerie silence. No voices, no sounds of work, just the occasional cry of the hungry animals that hadn't been fed since, well, they didn't know since when. The farm looked normal from a distance, but up close, things felt wrong. The door to the house was unlocked, but no one answered their calls. The barn door stood slightly open. It was there, in the barn, that they found the first bodies. The shock must have been incomprehensible. Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, his daughter Victoria, his 7-year-old granddaughter, all dead, all murdered, all stacked together and covered with hay. They searched the house next. Maria Baumgartner in her bedroom, Joseph in his crib, 6 people, an entire household, wiped out. One of the men ran back to the village to alert the police. Word spread through the community like wildfire. The Grubers, all of them, murdered. By nightfall, Hinterkaifeck was swarming with officers, officials, and horrified onlookers. The investigation that followed would be one of the largest in Bavarian history. Over 100 suspects would be questioned. Theories would multiply, but the killer would never be caught. Not then. Not in the 100 years since. Whoever murdered 6 people at Hinterkaifeck and spent days living among their corpses got away with it completely. The investigation revealed disturbing details about what had happened at Hinterkaifeck. The victims had been killed with a mattock, a farm tool similar to a pickaxe. The killer was likely someone experienced with such tools, which meant a farmer or laborer. The 4 barn victims had been killed first, then the 2 in the house. Little Kazilia had survived the initial attack and died slowly over several hours. The evidence of the killer staying for days was unmistakable. Fresh animal droppings in the barn from days after the murders, consumed food in the kitchen, beds that had been slept in. Perhaps most disturbingly, investigators found that someone had been living in the attic for an extended period before the murders. There was a makeshift bed made of hay up there, food scraps, and a space worn in the hay where someone had repeatedly peered down through a hole to watch the family. Over the following months, police questioned over 100 suspects. The list read like a catalog of everyone who had reason to want the Grubers dead. There were neighbors who had disputed property with Andreas, former employees he had treated badly, Victoria's former romantic interests who might have been jealous or angry, men from the village who might have sought revenge for the family's public shame. There was even speculation about Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, who had supposedly died in World War I. His body had never been recovered from the battlefield. What if he wasn't dead? What if he'd returned to find his wife living in incest with her father, his children possibly not his own? What if he'd come back for revenge? It's a compelling theory, but like all the others, it could never be proven. The investigation dragged on for years without resolution. Evidence was mishandled by today's standards. The farm was not properly secured in those initial days, and villagers trampled through the crime scene, destroying potential clues. The bodies were examined by a local doctor rather than a forensic specialist. Most shockingly, the heads of all 6 victims were removed and sent to Munich for analysis, then lost. They've never been found. The original case files were destroyed during World War II when Allied bombs hit the Munich courthouse where they were stored. In 1955, the farm buildings themselves were demolished, erasing the physical scene of the crime forever. Every possible source of evidence has been lost, destroyed, or corrupted. It's as if the Hinterkaifeck murders want to remain unsolved. So who killed the Gruber family? After a century of investigation, amateur and professional, several theories have emerged as most likely. The first is that the killer was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who had an affair with Victoria and may have been the biological father of little Joseph. When Andreas forced Victoria to end the relationship, Lorenz was furious. He was also one of the first people to arrive at the crime scene, and witnesses said he went directly to the barn as if he already knew what he'd find there. Some researchers note that he was never seriously investigated, despite clear motive and opportunity. Was Lorenz protecting a secret by silencing the entire family? It's possible, but proving it a century later is impossible. The second theory is that the killer was a transient, a drifter passing through the area. This would explain why the killer was never caught. He simply moved on after the murders and was never seen in Bavaria again. It would explain why he lived in the attic before the murders. He needed shelter, and the isolated farm was perfect. And it would explain why he stayed after the killings. He had nowhere else to go. This theory has been supported by reports of an unknown man seen in the area around the time of the murders, and by the lack of any clear personal connection to the family. The murders could have been random, the victims simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, killed by a madman passing through. The third theory remains the most dramatic. Karl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, supposedly killed in World War I. His body was never recovered, which happened often in that brutal war. But what if he survived? What if he returned years later to find his wife living in an incestuous relationship with her father, his children possibly not his own? The rage would be incomprehensible. He might have stalked the family for days, watching from the attic, confirming his worst fears before carrying out his revenge. This theory would explain the killer's intimate knowledge of the farm and why he was comfortable staying there after the murders. It was, in a way, still his home. Hinterkaifeck remains Germany's most famous unsolved murder case. The farm is gone now, demolished in 1955, replaced by a memorial marker and empty fields. But the story refuses to die. Every few years, someone claims to have new evidence or a new theory. Books have been written, documentaries made. In 2007, German police academy students reviewed the case as a training exercise and concluded that Lorenz Schlittenbauer was the most likely killer. But even they acknowledged there was no way to prove it. The truth is, we will probably never know who murdered the Gruber family. Every witness is dead. Every piece of evidence is lost or destroyed. The killer, whoever he was, got away with it. He lived the rest of his life knowing what he did, knowing he would never be caught. He might have walked past the memorial to his victims. He might have read the news stories with grim satisfaction. What haunts me about Hinterkaifeck isn't just the brutality of the murders, it's the intimacy of them. Someone watched this family for days, learned their routines, knew when they woke and when they slept, then killed them one by one and lived among their corpses like it was nothing. That level of cold calculation, that ability to sleep in a dead family's beds, suggests someone truly monstrous, but also someone who blended back into normal life so completely that no one ever suspected them. The killer of Hinterkaifeck might have been the neighbor you waved to, the farmer you bought eggs from, the stranger who passed through town and never returned. We'll never know. And that's the most terrifying part. Some monsters never get caught. They just disappear. 6 people, 100 years, 0 answers. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved and likely always will. If this case haunted you the way it haunts me, subscribe to Mystery Files. Hit the bell. Leave a comment telling me what case you want to see next, because some mysteries are meant to be shared, even the ones that will never be solved. Thanks for watching.